consequences of having the wrong president in place, completely reverse that. We have had millions come into this country illegally. There's a couple of things we can do immediately. Number one, if you are an asylum seeker and you do not come through a legal port of entry into this country, then you are immediately disqualified from being adjudicated as an asylum seeker. You're done. You go home.
Hey guys, it's an election season. St. George City elections are the most important thing. We want you to go to votestg.com and find out who's running and what they stand for. See us all over Southern Utah in our voter information booth. We'll be at Digby's Market, Red Rock Bicycles, and the park. We'll see you out there. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. It's 435 Podcast. I got another In the Running candidate interview with Bruce Hough. We went an hour. This was a good one. We talked on a lot of good, important issues that I hadn't heard him talk about before. We talked about foreign policy, both immigration and militarily. We talked about his budget strategy, a little bit about Department of Education and his stance on that, helped expand that out a little bit more. We hope you enjoy the episode, but don't forget, your ballots are in the mail. You're going to get them any day now. Make sure there's 3 St. George City seats, but there's 3 city seats in every city in Washington County. So you make sure that you pick the top 3 for this primary election. September 5th is when you got to get the ballots in by. If you don't mail it in a week ahead of time, you can drop it off the day of. September 5th is the day. Make sure you select the boxes. The congressional candidate for District 2 will be on your ballot as well for the Republican Party. I think there's 3 on there. But this is Bruce Hough. We hope you enjoy this episode. VoteSTG.com to find a list of the St. George City candidates, and also Bruce Hough, Celeste Malloy, Becky Edwards, Brad Green, a bunch of the other candidates that are running for that seat as well. You can find it at VoteSTG.com, and we hope you can enjoy this episode. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Our state has this abundance of not just beauty, but the people. When I was the chairman of the Republican Party, the privilege I had was to travel to all 29 counties and to do it numerous times, even in a year. I would go to the county conventions. I would go to the Lincoln Day dinners, and I'd go to, fairs and other things. Emory County still has the best lamb fry in the state, I think. A lemon pepper lamb in a Dutch oven is pretty fantastic.
I have not heard that, but I will have to check it out. That's for sure. Well, so this actually brings up my first question. So there's a debate here. It's probably not with very many people, but with the nomination at convention with Celeste Malloy, and then this I don't know if it's a scandal, but it's about, where she's lived, where you live, living within a district, representing a district because you're from an area. This is a consistent thing. And because I'm not from here, I'm trying to look at it from a third party perspective, like trying to understand all the sides. And sure. I can see how representation in Southern Utah is really important. And I agree with that because obviously I live here. And historically we haven't had representation here, but maybe give me your take on the living in the district versus not living in the district. And then where is there this, sure. It seems like the party itself is split on this opinion.
Yeah. I don't want to get too wonky, but let's just kind of step back for a minute. The way the Constitution reads, it's very clear. You have 2 senators for every state. So right. You will always have, with 50 states, you'll have 100 senators. With the Congress, you will always have now 435 members. But those members will vary in terms of where they represent based on population shifts.
Right.
So some northeastern states will have lost representation, and Utah, for example, gained one a couple of years ago with our 4th congressional district, and probably in 2030 we'll get a 5th. So what happens is the legislature has the responsibility by law to actually draw the districts. Now, they draw the districts. People think they're so goofy. They're not geographically consistent. They don't do this. Here's the thing. They're not supposed to be geographic. They're supposed to be population. So the idea is, how do we get 4 equally populated districts in the state?
Mm-hmm.
Now they want to try the objective is try to keep counties and municipalities together the best you can. But we also are the most urbanized state in the United States. We have the Wasatch Front, basically, it has this urban area, and almost everything else is rural, notwithstanding the growth of Washington County in particular. So it's the most urbanized state in the country. So with that said, what do you do? Well, you draw by population, and you have to have the equal number of people in each area.
Mm-hmm.
So our district actually starts in Farmington in Davis County,
Right.
north of Salt Lake City, and goes all the way down to St. George, and then all of the counties to the west of the Green River and south of Uinta and Carbon and Emery counties, and everything on the west side going up into Tooele. Now, Juab is the one exception. They cut Nephi and Levan, which were my wife's heritage comes out of Nephi and Levan. That's cut off from Juab County, so that county is not intact. And then we have part of Salt Lake City as part of it. Now, I'm going through that whole thing to just say this is a disparate kind of geography. You have suburban areas, you have urban areas, you have rural areas, and you have it stretching almost the entire length of the state. It's the state. This district is about 40% of the geography of the entire state.
Right.
Now here's the thing. When people say you need to live in the district, what does that mean? If I live in Davis County, I'm living in the district. Does that make me a better congressman for people that live in Washington County? Or if I live in Cedar City, then does that make me a better congressman for the people who live in North Salt Lake or in Salt Lake City proper?
Right.
See, the idea here isn't about where you live so much as who you represent. And I live 20 minutes from the district. Celeste, for the last 4 years, has lived, probably 5 or 6 hours from the district by plane and by car.
Well, and like to your point, what I would think is that the congressman representing me or the district would represent a similar demographic of that district, right? So a subset of demographic, whether it's not necessarily geographic, the location, but do you see? Are you from a rural background? Is the district, what's the socioeconomic levels of this district? What is it mainly retired? Is it mainly families? Thinking about who it is that you're representing, that seems to be more of an importance than it necessarily is like where you live. But I think understanding the people that you represent is what the expectation is for that congressional member, because we're tasking you to go to Washington, D.C., which is basically you're going to be there 60% of the year, maybe 50% of the year. They're specifically working on things that you can bring home and work on stuff specifically for your district. So, I tend to agree with you that where you live is less important as to who you are and who are you trying to represent, because the people see you as a great representative of them, right? I think
I was driving back from our debate in Tooele, and that I had with Celeste. Becky doesn't show up for debates.
I know. I can't believe you did 10, by the way. I can't believe you did 10, by the way. That's a lot. That's a lot. But you got in front of a lot of people.
We set up one in West Valley next week. Actually, nice. We're going to do the same night as the presidential debate. But I was just going to point out, I'm driving back from our debate in Tooele, and I'm thinking, I'm going to be home a lot quicker than Celeste is going to be home, because the northern part of the district is very close to where I live.
Right.
And the southern district is closer to where Celeste purportedly lives. I mean, she lives with her sister, I think, in Cedar City. And look, she lived in Beaver for 10 years. I give her that, right? I mean, she lived in Beaver and worked in that area. But for the last 4 years, she's been in Washington D.C. And so the idea of where you live, and look, I know our Washington County Republican chairman Lisa is just like, this is a non-negotiable for her, and I can't. I've talked to her. I cannot help her understand how it's not that important. What's important is, in fact, if you think about it, 5 of the last 9 elections for Congress in this state were by people and who won. People who won were outside their district when they ran.
Yeah. Well,
I
and
mean, so it's not an unusual thing. And the reality is that it's the people decide who is going to best represent them, not where their head hits the pillow. Because you said it, at least 3 nights a week, my head's hitting the pillow in Washington, D.C. I'm going to be spending the Sabbath with my family. The other couple of days, I'm going to be in the district working with people, probably staying at someplace in Washington County or Cedar City or in Loa, or wherever it happens to be. I might even camp out when I'm in the district because I love living outdoors.
well, there's lots of
But
places to camp in your district, that's for sure. There's lots of places. You
there
got
are
a good
lots of
good
places,
district
and
to camp in.
I'm an outdoors guy. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking to the guy that has been up Mount Whitney a couple of times, done parts of the Pacific Crest Trail, but in this state, I have been all over the. I mean, you probably name it. I've probably been there in this state. Not only as a leader of Boy Scouts, but as somebody who just loves being out in the outdoors backpacking. I've dragged my kids from one end of the state to the other for political purposes, just to have them go with me and have companionship on drives through the state, but also just to be in the outdoors. I mean,
Yeah.
Slot Canyons and the Blue Mountains and the Red Rocks. I mean, look, I even done the Ironmans in St. George. So
Well,
I'm
it's hot when they do the Ironman down here. That's a bold move.
I hurt the bottom of my feet the last time. The asphalt was so hot by the time I got to the run, because I'm kind of slow. By the time the asphalt was so hot, I literally burned the bottom of my feet through my tennis shoes.
You got to be careful
And
out there, Bruce.
it's great.
I don't recommend that to anybody doing that. I give mad respect for all the Ironmans out there that do it here in Southern Utah.
Going up Snow Canyon, I I saw people getting off their bike, and guys a lot younger than me, by the way. I'm just saying. And I'm saying I am not getting off my bike. And I just would grind up that. I mean, they were walking faster than I could pedal my bike, but I was not getting
Not
off
going
my
to get
bike.
off, not quit. Well, I like I like the no quit attitude. Well, and so thinking about this, that was one thought that I was like, I think it's worth bringing up is this location in the district and give your perspective on it, because I guess I can kind of see both sides, right? But transitioning into the different, what are your main pillars of your campaign? Where do you feel like there's gaps? Looking at Chris Stewart, I think he was a very popular congressman across the state, but thinking about moving forward and how we're going to take District 2, but also the next legislature going into it, it sounded like the budget was another key point, and financial responsibility was something that was really important to you in bringing and taking it to Washington, and I've listened to a few of the debates and listened to a few of your perspectives on the budget in particular, where if you're looking at the $6 trillion American federal budget, where do you feel like we need, cuts to be made? Is it potentially that we, I'm an advocate for cutting the strings and cutting the purse strings of the government and giving them less money. However, the likelihood that we're going to rein in the amount of spending that we are at the moment, it doesn't seem like it seems like we're a long way from that. So as you build your coalition, I know you're an advocate for term limits. Let's assume you're a 3-term limit guy. Let's assume you got a short window of opportunity to make some changes. What are your go-to first steps as far as trying to rein in that budget?
Yeah. Look, if we can just slow government down to a 1% growth rate,
Okay.
then we can actually start chipping away at our debt. We don't really have a budget. That's the problem. We do continuing resolutions all the time. We need to actually, and being a business guy, this we work on budgets, and we do zero based budgets, not oh, let's this is how much we spent this year, let's add 4% next year. That's the federal government model. The federal government model is hurry and spend your money before the end of the year so that you have your baseline budget that you can then add 4% to next year. Now, that's not what we do in business. That's not how we're successful in business. In fact, there's a reverse incentive in business versus the government. If I have a budget and I have employees who are looking at it and saying, you know what, we don't need to spend all this year, I'll probably bonus them if they don't. If they can save money, I'll probably share some of that savings with them because they've been conscientious and they're thinking about the actual business as an entity that needs to be successful so that everyone who is a stakeholder in that business can be successful, whether it's a customer, an employee, a shareholder, or a supplier.
Well, sorry to cut you off.
Yes.
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
And I know you're on roll, but help me understand, because I think there's potentially there's one person listening that's thinking, but the government isn't a business. The government isn't necessarily meant to make a profit, right? And so if that's the mentality, and that's the financial profitability of a business is what makes the creation of it, right? Aside from a podcast, because it never makes money. However, if you think of a business, the whole incentive and then the reason it would continue is because there's profitability there. But the government isn't set up to make a profit. So drawing these two analogies, I can see your perspective, but how do we bridge that gap between the government not being a business and that?
Okay, so I think there's a discipline there in how you create budgets, though.
Okay.
How you create a budget is a discipline that needs to be applied to that. And it needs to be more zero-based, what actually is needed to accomplish our objective versus just a cost plus every year. People say that we are cutting. When the Democrats yell and scream and say, they're cutting, the cuts aren't cuts. They're reductions in increases. That's what a cut is to a Democrat. So if instead of going to a 4% increase, we're only going to increase it by 1%, that would be a huge win because our economy's growth would then be greater than our spending growth in that situation. But okay, let's take away the profit incentive. That maybe it's not the best analogy. I think it does have analogous issues. But what about the nonprofit world? If you're in the nonprofit world, which I have been, and you manage that very effectively because you are rated by organizations like Charity Navigator, who say, hey, if you're spending more than 10 to 15% on administrative and all of my donations and contributions aren't getting to helping people that I want to help in your charity, then they're going to say, I'm going to think twice about this. I'm not. And if you look at government, it's exactly the opposite. So if I'm spending 10% on overhead, I'm going to get a gold star from Charity Navigator. But I'm spending an exorbitant amount on overhead in the U.S. budget system and through regulators, and much lesser portions are getting into the classrooms or into the actual needed areas. So this goes to your direct question, and that is, what do you do? Well, one of the things that I would do immediately is work I know I can't completely defund or completely obliterate the Department of Education, for example. I need 60 senators to probably do that. But I can increase block grants that are unrestricted to states so that the states actually can then administer in a much more efficient manner through school district and even with parental involvement how that money is spent. If I just take the amount of money that's spent on K through 12, which is only about 10, it's maybe not even 10% of the Department of Education budget. Think of that. K through 12 spending is like 10% of the education budget. If I just took that 10% and block granted it directly to states and to school districts, I could add $30,000 in new money into our classrooms because I'm not rubbing off the administrative costs of going through the Department of Education. Why should they have anything to say about what's happening in our schools and our classrooms anyway? So let's just separate that, and then let's get the money back where it belongs. It's better, and I think you said it in the very beginning, it's better that they don't take as much money back to Washington, because if it gets there, it's going to get rubbed off for administrative costs and overhead, and we're going to get less back. It'd be better if we just left it here. But short of that, and we did get tax cuts under the Trump administration that were really important. But short of, then let's take the money that is being spent by the federal government and get it back to the states. Because look, the Constitution doesn't even provide for a Department of Education or a lot of other departments that regulate our lives. And we should be pushing as much of those things back to the states as we possibly can. It goes back to the enumeration of powers in the 9th, 10th, and 14th Amendments of the Constitution.
Right. Well, so if looking at the Department of Education, for example, I think I'm just looking at what the budgetary resources for the 2023. It's the Department of Education's 2% of the budget. It's $269 billion, and it looks like over $200 billion of that goes directly to student aid, right? So like financial aid, from the way I'm looking at it. Well, now, do you think this is a reaction? It's a reaction to the system as a whole, the university system, because I know the biggest portion of this fund I know is going to university. It's not going, like you said, it's not going through K through 12, which I think is the most important part of the education system. From my perspective, we should be putting more emphasis on the younger kids and giving them the resources and tools and the teachers that are doing that versus the university system. However, the universities are making massive profits. They have endowment funds that are in the $1 billion within their own right.
Crazy.
It's crazy, yeah. and they're it's protected. So I look at this. It's a big number, but it's interesting to me that the financial aid to the universities, for the universities that already have the money, within their own funds and things like that, it's still a small drop in the bucket when we're talking about $6 trillion. But is the Department of Education, is that kind of like, is that where you think you would start? Or is that just an example of where needs to be
for low-hanging fruit? Look, let's be completely honest here. Entitlements have to be on the table. Young guys like you who are making good money and who are figuring out life, you are in a position to take care of yourself in a much better way than depending on Social Security. We should never touch Social Security for people who are in the system or who are near entering the system. But if you're in your 20s, 30s, even 40s, we need to change the actuarial tables are different than they were when these were set up. We can certainly push out retirement age longer. Just adding a couple of years will make a significant difference in how this payout and how the Social Security system will be able to pay out over time.
Did they riot in France?
We need to offer different programs. I mean, I loved Buffett when they said, well, what would you tell your wife if you were gone and you were advising your wife what she should do, for her retirement? And he said something very, very insightful, very simple. He said, I would tell her to put her money in an index fund, a no load index fund, and just let it ride, and just keep putting it in and let it ride. And over time, it's going to well outperform anything that Social Security is ever going to do for somebody that's in their 20s, 30s, 40s.
Well, if we had the index fund back in the 60s, when we kept Social Security going, thanks LBJ. If we had an index fund back then, I think we would have gotten that great advice. But since that only happened in the 90s, I guess as a millennial, that's all I get is the index funds and not Social Security. But you're
probably smarter and can figure out something even better. But I'm just saying that if you want to not have to worry about it, index fund is an easy way to do it.
I think in retrospect, Social Security wasn't something that was supposed to last forever, but here we are. And entitlements, it's a third rail. It was the third rail of politics post Nixon, right? I mean, It's always been one of those things that if you want to get the American voter, the person who actually shows up to the booth or mails it in these days, if you're actually trying to get to the person that actually votes, entitlements are kind of a third rail. But being the oldest of the millennial generation, one of the older on the millennial generation side, I think we're not all counting on that to be our retirement plan.
Gen, Robert, I thought you were ex-gen.
No, not Gen. No, I'm not Gen X. Oh, they really ruined it. No, I'm just kidding. If any of the Gen Xers are listening, they really blew it. But that to be said, so we have education. There's got to be some entitlements. Reining in on increasing that, or what else? Is there anything else in that budget?
Well, so for example,
I'm trying to lean on. I'm not trying to steer you towards the military budget, but it's $876 billion towards the Department of Defense.
Right to the military budget. It's funny that you brought that up. So I am a huge supporter of the military. I'm very disappointed that Biden reduced expenditures from about 5.4 of GDP down to about 3. Here's the thing: we need to be the strongest, most powerful nation in the world. We need to do that as a deterrent. We need to do that as not as a policeman of the world, not as the cop, but as the standard that people can look to as we have somebody who is available in the world to counteract communism. Most Gen Xers don't even understand what a communist is. I'm old enough to understand what it is. And if they don't, if you look and carefully at what China wants to do, they're looking, and it sounds like a comic book, but they're looking for world domination. Xi has been very open about that. He wants to be the as in singular, superpower in the world. So here, military. So we need to do this. It's the one federal function that they're supposed to actually be spending money on, the federal government. That is national security and protecting this country. So that is something that in a federalist system they are supposed to be doing. But here's the thing: this is clearly and I am a big supporter of the military. I'm an honorary commander at the 388th Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base, which actually employs a lot of people from this district. Mm-hmm. And so it's an important part, not only of this district, but of the state. But here's the thing. There's 30% waste that they've identified in Pentagon spending. If I just went into that 30% and said, okay, let's get it down to 20%. Let's get it down to 15%. Let's get it down to 10%. Let's try to get it to zero. I mean, we'll probably never get to zero. But the reality is there are billions of dollars we can reattach to productivity in our military without having to allocate new monies, because we're just going to be more efficient, because we're being more effective. We're acting more like a business that says we can't afford to lose 30% of our funds in our business. I would be called on the carpet by the SEC for not being a good fiduciary. Or the SEC. We're fiduciaries. I think that Congress needs to think of itself as a fiduciary organization. We have the responsibility to act in the best interests of the citizens of this country. And when we don't, we're violating that fiduciary duty. And I just think we have to be really strict and careful about that.
So you're not necessarily opposed to reducing the Department of Defense budget, but what you're saying is you feel like there's mismanagement and there's waste within those resources. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would want to reduce it. I want them to have, I think the percentage of GDP that we still need to be north of 3%. We have to be the light on the hill. We have to be that shining light on the hill that Reagan talked about. This is still, and we have to be the deterrent. Russia's not going to be a deterrent anymore. They're destroying their entire military infrastructure. China is what's left, and China is watching every minute and looking for every weakness of resolve and every weakness of stability within the West. So, having a strong NATO, having a strong alliance in the western part of the world is absolutely critical, and our allies in Asia with South Korea and Japan and Taiwan is essential. So,
well, so I heard two different things from you, specifically when it came to giving money to Ukraine. At one point, I thought I heard you say that you were you've I can't remember exactly what you said, but give me your stance on at least how we're funding Ukraine. How giving money to foreign countries for their own disbursement of those funds. What's your stance on that?
well, first of all, I think it's like anything else. If we're going to give money, whether it's through USAID or it's to a military action, we determine how that money is spent. We decide what we're giving for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to give, Bradley tanks to Ukraine, we know what that is, and we've defined what that is. The Ukraine situation is obviously a very difficult one.
So complex.
In my view, we wouldn't even be there if Biden hadn't completely botched and the exit from Afghanistan. Putin would never have felt empowered to do that. But when he saw how badly we exited Afghanistan, the loss of life, leaving people there that were our allies, leaving $70 billion worth of armaments. I mean, we've given $75 billion or allocated or appropriated $75 billion to Ukraine. We almost left that in ground armaments in Afghanistan. That is a complete and utter travesty. And
you put that you put that directly on the president. And granted, yeah. He's the commander in chief, right? So he's at the top of that Department of Defense budget. So
think about. I mean, not only was the Biden election a disaster for that action that took place in Ukraine, in my view, and the view of many scholars and security experts, but think about our energy dependence. We were energy independent, and we should be energy dominant. There's no reason we can't be energy dominant in the world today and be a net exporter of energy. You're paying $4 a dollar a gas that we were paying $2 a gallon during the Trump administration. So we having who we put into office has consequences. So how you vote has consequences. Becky Edwards voted for Biden. Celeste didn't even bother to vote, which I think is and not just that election, but 4 out of the last 6 elections. In fact, her entire voting history is about 50%. So it matters if you do not vote for the right person or vote at all, or you vote for the wrong person. It has huge consequences. And everybody's vote counts. It just does. That's just the nature of our electoral system. They all count. And we need to make sure that we're being really conscientious of that.
Well,
back to Ukraine, I wanted to just finish up what I was saying there.
Perfect.
We should never have boots on the ground there. We should never have aircraft flying over Ukraine. NATO needs to step up and do their part. They need to come up to their 2% of GDP that they have committed to for over 20 years now. And most of the nations have not done that. And they need to do that to support NATO so that NATO is the primary helper to Ukraine. Russia,
but NATO is not part of Ukraine. So your stance is that that Ukraine should be a part of NATO?
Well, I'm just saying that Ukraine was not a part of NATO, candidly, because they had so much corruption in their government that that we can certainly reflect on the relationship that Hunter Biden and his father had with Ukraine in those days. That they didn't qualify to be part of Ukraine. But here's the thing that happened. In 1994, the UK, the US, and Russia sat down with Ukraine and said, take your nuclear missiles and we're going to get rid of them. And if you do that, we're going to guarantee your sovereignty. Mm-hmm. So that was us. We said it, UK said it, and Russia said it. Russia has now violated that. And though we do not have a NATO treaty with Ukraine, we did make a commitment. Russia has violated that now. And just the fact that the loss of life is so horrific. And I've
Oh
had
yeah.
students who I've taught out of Ukraine, um, it, that have had to leave the country. That the I was in Czech Republic, going through a refugee area that they'd had the entire complex of, it was their largest arena in Prague, bringing in people through Poland that had escaped from Ukraine. This is horrific. This is war. There is nothing about war that is good.
No.
It is the loss
Agreed.
of life on all sides, the Russian soldiers as well as the Ukrainians, and it has to stop. And there has to be an exit strategy here. There has to be some way to say we are going to agree to be out of this conflict. But yeah, there is an obligation there. Certainly a moral one. The West has to be united in this. This has been an important message to Xi in terms of China, because he's looking at this and saying, will the West stay united in this front? And again, there's limits to what we should and ought to do inside Ukraine. It's their country, it's their sovereign country. They've stepped up, they're fighting, they're the people who are losing their lives in this process. No one should ever minimize the fact that they stood fast when Putin thought he could roll right into Kyiv and take over the entire country. They fought back, and they fought back
I
on their own.
I think they have fought a lot more valiantly than I think the expectation was, and to that point, and this is just not that my opinion matters, but I'm gonna take the opportunity anyway. This idea a land war in Europe, right? This is something that you after World War II you think, oh hey, we're not going to make this mistake again. We're back at it, and the idea that the United States, we've seen multiple failures. We basically since World War II, United States military strategy has failed time after time after time. Proxy wars end up being created. Other Cold Wars end up being created. Really, if I was to look at it, peace and diplomacy is the best way for us to create stability within all of these economies. However, powers that be, to get instability and to gain power is where you cross that line, and where diplomacy fails, then we end up killing each other. And it's a lesson that I guess every generation has to learn. And unfortunately, it's on the backs of the younger generation. But to take the transition, but still looking at foreign policy at a certain level, walk me through some immigration policy and what is your stance on the current immigration challenges, because it's complex. It's so complex, and it goes back 150 years. We've been dealing with how the United States bring me. You're tired. You're hungry. You're poor. Yearning to breathe free. We take the Statue of Liberty. We have Ellis Island to today. What's going on the southern border? Because it's going to impact us here in southern Utah for sure, and Utah in general. But take me through what your thoughts are on immigration.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, every state's a border state. Let's just be really clear about it. It's the way that the immigration system is operating right now is a disaster. Again, harkening back to the Trump administration, we had cut down the number of illegal immigrants so dramatically, the lowest in probably a generation. And then consequences of having the wrong president in place completely reversed that. We have had millions come into this country illegally. There's a couple of things we can do immediately. Number one, if you are an asylum seeker and you do not come through a legal port of entry into this country, then you are immediately disqualified from being adjudicated as an asylum seeker. You're done. You go home. You go someplace else. Stay in Mexico policy actually should still be in force. That needs to happen anyway. The second thing is, and by the way, if you do that, you're going to cut the knees out under the cartels and the coyotes who are bringing these people across differently than through a port of entry, who are then going to seek asylum. If you can stop that and say you have to, if you tell people in Honduras and Guatemala and these countries that I spent a lot of time in, by the way, they get the message. They know what they can and can't do and what they can get away with and what they can't get away with. They know more about U.S. policy and how they'll be treated than you and I do. Somehow that gets communicated to them, and that's the first thing. And so they have to come through a port of entry. By the way, 80% of asylum seekers do not qualify for asylum. So we need to put immediately at the border and take it out of the hands of the DOJ, put it in the hands of the Border Patrol. We need to put in magistrates and judges who will adjudicate all those asylum seekers without letting them go and say, oh, come back for a court date. We can't do the catch and release. When they come across for asylum, then let's evaluate it. Let's do the adjudication. Let's get it done. They either qualify or they don't. If they do, then we provide that hospitality. If they don't, then they go back to Mexico or wherever they came from to get across the border. And that's just the reality of doing that. We can do that immediately and make a difference. The other thing that I talk about a lot with this is the fact that you had, in the last 2 years, 80,000 children who disappeared into the fabric of our society who are not accompanied by their legal guardians. That is a travesty because we know what's happening. They're being human sex trafficking or child sex trafficking with those children. And we have got to put the hammer down on that, which means that one of the first things that I'll do in Congress is I'll propose legislation that will increase the penalties for child sex traffickers way up from 14 years as a beginning point, maybe starting at 25, maybe 50, but life imprisonment to capital punishment, because it is the most horrific crime that can be committed on the innocence of our children, and it's just, we have to do something about it. We actually screened Sounds of Freedom in St. George and Cedar City, in West Valley, and in Davis County, brought people in for free to come watch the film and talk about the implications of our immigration program as it relates to child sex trafficking. And it is an impactful film. If you haven't seen it, it's important to see. It's not a documentary. It is based on true facts, and I know personally of some of those true facts of people who participated in some of those operations. So it is true and it is real. And we just saw a bust the FBI made just recently, where they had over 110 people that were arrested in a child sex trafficking scheme. So it's a real thing, and it's part of that thing. Now, let's go to the other side of it. We need more workers in this country. H-1 visas, we've since 1990, we've said you can only get like 140,000 visas. That's not enough. That's an arbitrary number. And we have hospitality, construction, agriculture who need workers desperately right now. We have other skilled workers that we need in the STEM kind of categories. And right now, there's a backlog. And so we don't let them in, or we send them back if they've been at the university here. We should allow them to stay during the backlog until we get that caught up. And their families ought to be able to stay with them so their family units are kept intact. So there are some simple things we can do on immigration that will immediately allow us to fill many of the gaps that we have in our employment situation. We are, from an economic standpoint, above full employment. You walk down the street. I mean, there are jobs awaiting for people if they want to work.
Well, we've transitioned from manufacturing or from agriculture to manufacturing to the service industry economy, and that requires educated people, right? And we've been educating. The United States educates, right? They're from K through 12. We talked about that to begin with, and so my thought is we do have a labor shortage on a significant scale, and we've stopped having kids. So the labor force is going to continue to decline over time. So I think you nailed it.
22 grandkids. I'm doing my part on the kid front.
I did a several different papers specifically in the early 2000s, focusing on immigration and immigration reform. I went to a military school in Roswell, New Mexico, and about I think it was about 15 to 20% of my class. We had lots of kids from different countries. I think right now they're representing 17 countries at this school right now, but there's a huge contingent of Mexican nationals that were at the school. So I had my heart kind of goes out to Mexico in general as their population comes here. There's this asylum seeking argument, right? I'm seeking asylum, and you said that 80% don't qualify for asylum, and a lot of times I would probably disagree with you, is that they don't know the process because they're not educated, and they're just saying they get told by a coyote that they'll get them across the border and they'll get them to the United States and they'll get them a job, right? And they say whatever it takes. It's untenable, the life that I'm living right now. So I'm going to go to the United States and I'm going to go get a job and I'm going to go provide for a family. So they come here illegally because there is no other option. There is not a simple, easy way to get a visa. We don't have enough visas in the United States. That arbitrary number goes back to Ireland, and the Irish that were coming here. We had to put caps on the number of people that were coming here because it was the feeling that there was this flood of anti-American humans that were, and truthfully, right, it goes back to a religious thing. So culturally, I can see the pushback from a lot of people that have heritage, especially on the west part of the western part of the United States, where this culture is different, right? The Hispanic culture, the Latino culture is different than a typical white, Caucasian, middle class American livelihood, right? It's different. So there's fear in this transition that we've gone through, whether we gave them visas or not, because they come across the border illegally. So my take on it has always been, if we can clean up the system of allowing them to come here legally, not illegally, but to come here here legally, give them the resources in the locations in where they reside, and not require that they get here and then they go through the process once they're here. That seems to me has always been the obvious answer. But every time these bills have come up in Congress, they've failed. We haven't had reform. In 2005, McCain drafted one during the Bush administration that's the kind of the main one that I studied extensively, and it pushed for these increases in these visas, and we haven't even gotten close to discussing it. It seems like things have gotten completely out of control.
Well, I think part of the reason, Robert, is that they try to do comprehensive immigration reform. We're never going to get full agreement on what people think comprehensive is. So we have to break it apart. So I would just take H-1 visas as an example. Just focus on that one thing, just that one thing, because that's one. Look, this goes back to pre-JFK.
We need that HB1 visa. We need that. This is important. This is an important one. I agree.
Yeah, it goes back to the Bracero program where you had 1 million Mexican nationals cross the border every year legally to work in agriculture, and mostly in California. Mm-hmm. And you had about 100,000 illegals who came. So the unions went to JFK and said, "You want our support? You got to stop this Bracero program. You got to do it completely different." And so they killed it. So the next year, what happened? You had 100,000 people come over legally. You had 1 million people come over illegally, and they didn't go back, because if they went back, they couldn't get back. So that began this entire process. It was in essence a guest worker program that said, "Hey, you can come and go seasonally, work in the agriculture, and then go back and work seasonally and come back." We killed that program. I'm not saying it was perfect, but what it did is it provided a legal means for people to come and work and then go back home. Now, today, we don't even necessarily need them to go back home. We just need them to come and work. So the H-1 visa program is absolutely critical. Again, 1990, 140,000 people, that's the quota. And it's like, well, why are we even it's an arbitrary number today. The whole green card system is faulty. I mentioned the STEM type workers, those who come to school here who have applied. There is a need for their skill. We have a need for their skill in this country. They cannot get a green card because there's a backlog. That's nonsense. We have plenty of federal employees. Let's reallocate them and let's get them to push these things through on these that do it. And then allow their families to be with them. Don't make that a hardship, because now you've just created another problem for keeping people employed and doing the jobs that we brought them in to do. So the green card system needs revamping. The H-1 visa program specifically for hospitality, agriculture, and construction, those three areas, we need desperately those people.
Yeah.
And I just, yeah, it's nuts. But if we try to do a comprehensive, like I'm going to put the wall in and I'm going to put, security into that one and the visas, it's never going to get through. I don't mind doing it in parallel. Let's build wall. Let's build, a secure border, but let's don't tie it to the visa program. Let's make the visa program stand on its own. We have specific needs there. The Chamber of Commerce ought to be jumping all over this nationally. And I've run an operation that has had green card holders. And I've gone through, and these are people that are like skilled workers, some of them from countries not Latin American, and the hoops you have to jump through. There's a woman who worked for the Attorney General's office for 25 years. She's a Canadian citizen. She has to go in every 2 years with two ICE agents to have an interview to renew her green card status. She went to BYU Law School. She's a 25-year attorney with the Attorney General's office. And we're wasting ICE people's time to have that interview with her? That makes no sense. Our efficiencies are completely messed up.
It's a bureaucratic. It's the bloat of bureaucracy, right? It's the never-ending expansion of these systems. So when we create these systems, we end up creating these ever-growing systems on top of it. Well, so hey, I appreciate that. That was a really candid perspective on this. I really do appreciate you diving deeper into that. Making kind of a transition. I was Jeff. Is Jeff on? Is Jeff here? Jeff was a little bit late, running late, but I wanted to make sure if I got time. Jeff's my partner, Bruce.
The biggest thing that I was thinking about, I think was addressed pretty on point, and that was the living in the district question. I had kind of gone back and forth a little bit on after talking with Celeste a little bit, and just thinking about why it might be important, why it might not be important. And so I think Bruce, you did a good job of addressing that. So I appreciate that.
Well, just add something to it, because that's one thing I did want to mention, because I do think you have to have an understanding of the various things. When I was chairman of the Republican Party, one of the things that I said when I pushed on redistricting with the legislature was we should always have an urban and a rural component of a congressional district, because we're a small state and we only have 4 Congress people. And we need to make sure that all 4 of them are aligned in caring about what happens in rural areas as well as suburban and urban areas. And, some people say they look at where I live or my zip code and they go, oh, well, he's that kind of a guy. Well, you don't know who I am by zip code. You don't know that I grew up in a small town working on my grandfather's farm, bucking bales of hay and hilling potatoes and doing those kinds of things. You don't know that I've worked in water, where I've had to do transfer and diversion rights through the state engineer's office to transfer water ownerships. You don't know that by my zip code that I've done those things. That's part of my heritage. That's part of what I understand. I learned the hard work the hard way, candidly. I remember as a kid, I didn't really necessarily enjoy it in the moment. But I look back on it and I go, man, that was very informing of who I became as a man, because it taught me hard work. It taught me discipline. It taught me to get up in the morning and be there on time, because my grandfather was not going to be, waiting for me. I can tell you right now, it would not be a good day if he was waiting for me in the truck to take me out to the farm. So those are all things that make me sort of uniquely qualified as well to serve all parts of this district. And the reality is half the district is closer to me than it is to Celeste. but it doesn't matter because one of the places I like to be the most is with the people where they live. And it's really who you want or who you feel will show up and be there for you and will be accessible and who will fight for what's important. This state shares, the entire state shares almost all the same problems: federal land, water, in terms of our the things federally that we can deal with as a congressman. Uh, and then there's the security issues, there's budget, and there's government overreach. And the one thing we haven't talked about, and I know I tout my business experience, and I know that sometimes you think that's not a good analogy, Robert, but look, I'm the only person in this race who actually has fought against the regulatory state. I sued the FDA when they overreached their congressional authority and came up with a new rule that would have potentially destroyed the industry I was in. And we sued them and we won on the principle that we were suing about. And it was a huge win. Orrin Hatch said to me later, he said, because nobody joined us in the lawsuit. They were afraid the FDA would look at them differently and maybe more punitively towards them if they were to do something. And on the contrary, we just said, we don't care. We need to do this or it could jeopardize our entire industry. Orrin Hatch said to me, he says, I don't think people know just how close you came to losing this industry if you hadn't done that lawsuit. And I appreciate it.
Let me thanks for jumping in there, Jeff. I just want to make sure I didn't lose your or miss an opportunity for you to jump in.
Thanks for thinking about me. I appreciate that.
I know, and we're almost at a full hour, Bruce. So I really do appreciate you giving me as much time as you had. I will say this too, right before I ask this make this last point. No, here I'll go back to it. That's a total diatribe. I won't do that. But one thing to your business experience, I will say this. I'm at an impasse because truthfully, my vote's still in my pocket. I don't have a candidate in mind. I have city council candidates in mind. However, as far as this district, I still, the jury's out for me. One of the things I think is a strong value to Celeste is her policy, being an attorney, being a lawyer, looking at policy, working specifically on policy within this bureaucratic state, right? Understanding that, and I'll explain that with this perspective in mind. And this is probably the nerdiest thing I'll say. At Cal State Fullerton, I was on the Model United Nations, right? And so if some people might be like, "Oh, Model UN, huh? You didn't play baseball, you went to Model UN," but I did. So
we went. Good thing.
I think it's a good thing. Maybe people listen to politics. Maybe they can see some value in it. But we went and we did the Harvard Model United Nations a tournament or I can't remember what conference, and then we went to New York and we did the annual World Conference as well. And one thing, probably the biggest thing that I learned is that your delegation, right? The delegation, we were Turkey. The delegation strengths came as truthfully as a team. It wasn't even in any one individual. You could have a bunch of really smart, people within your delegation. But if you don't operate as a team and you can't share your influence and use your strengths and be able to create coalitions, and then also having those parts, having a policy maker, right? Somebody who can sit down, clearly identify a resolution, one that is going to take equal aspects, that's worded well. I think from my talks with Celeste, at least personally, and then also hearing her, I think she has a competitive advantage to those that are running. And Becky Edwards, I have no idea. I'm only going off hearsay because I can't get a hold of her either. And you're in the race within the same party, and you still can't get a hold of her. However, the policy aspect and her ability to get down to work, like actually doing the work, I think there's some strength in that. I think it's some hit the ground running aspect that I can agree with her on. However, I think from your perspective, you're definitely a smart guy. I'm not going to say that your success in life and the things that you've experienced, I think well equips you for the job, the leadership, the business, the navigation through territories like the satellite industry, like the satellite media industry earlier on in your career, paving the way in these ways, I think gives you a competitive advantage as well. So when I'm trying to draw, I see some equalness to those two things. I see some equalness to your leadership capabilities and understanding organizational management and building coalitions and getting things done that way. But I also see her policymaking strengths and how she could represent us in just a different capacity. I'd like your thoughts on or maybe help give me some guidance there.
I think you actually kind of nailed it, Robert, and that is leadership. Look, Chris Stewart was a business guy before he went in. What did he do? Well, he recruited well.
He hired really smart attorneys
to do something. One of the most important roles of a leader is their ability to recruit the right people, and I've had a great track record in that. And the idea of someone who can do policy, somebody in Celeste's position is being directed by the congressman to do the policy work that he wants to have done. Yes, there's a nuts and bolts aspect to this. I've had many attorneys work for me. And by the way, I sometimes kidded was that I play an attorney at work, but I'm not one. Because I read
real estate agents say that too. Just kidding.
I read everything, and I redlined documents back to my attorneys, and they would always comment, "Oh, good point. Yeah, good job." Or as nobody actually reads these things, then you're really giving me some good feedback here. And oh, I'm glad you caught that. And so I'm not an attorney, but I know how to work with them extremely well and have for many, many years, and know how to utilize the talents of the people around me, because I'm going to recruit the right people so that we do that. A congressman has to be the one who is thinking at the more global level of how this will work within the context of the district, the state, and the nation, and even globally. This idea of having to write about, look, we participated in writing legislation as a company. I was very involved with that. I understand what it takes to do that. I understand what it takes to get it passed. I also understand what it takes to kill bills that I think are bad. I've participated in that too, for years and years and years. So the idea of policy, you talked about the wonkiness of being in UN. Well, I've been an advisor in Europe to graduate level students in the area of security issues. We simulate not the UN, but the G20, the Foreign Affairs Council of the EU, and the North Atlantic Council of NATO. And they are in a bubble for a week where they take on the persona of the world leaders, and they have to develop from their negotiations, which are all done in accordance with diplomatic negotiation rules, and they have to develop a paper at the end of the week that is actually delivered to NATO as a consequence of that work. And we also, I usually set up with the number 2 general at NATO, who's the American general, to do a briefing on NATO. So the idea of kind of policy and getting those kinds of things, I have that both on the international level, but also on the congressional level, and even serving in a city council where you had to kind of do it yourself because you didn't have any staff to help you. Mm-hmm. So look, the idea here really is leadership. It's who has led organizations, led people to accomplish the objectives that you really have set forth. And I can get people to draft documents. I don't have to draft everything myself. Any congressman who thinks they can do that is up in the night, because you do not have time to do it. You have to have good staff to make this happen. Chris Stewart had a good staff. Orrin Hatch had a good staff. This is part of what the role of a congressman is, and I understand that better than anyone, because I can guarantee that I have hired more top level people in my career than anyone else in this race, because I'm the only one who probably has hired anyone. And that's part of what it takes to be a good leader and to be an effective congressman.
Well, hey, I appreciate that perspective, and it's going to be an interesting primary. Ballots are in the mail. They're in the
Yes,
mail.
they are.
They're about to hit the housing. The world is about to get their first taste of municipal elections at a high level, and I'm really hoping for a good turnout. But the whole purpose of me doing this podcast is to rock the vote and get out the vote. I want to say thank you, Bruce, for being on here. Thanks for tuning in. If you saw this, Bruce, I'm going to let you go because I know you got it at 11:30.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
If you make it out of the primary, I'm hoping I can have you on again and maybe dive a little bit deeper into a couple other topics. But I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you didn't know me from Adam before this, and I give you mad respect for just being open to talk to anybody. You had no idea what I was going to ask you. I could have started talking to you about some of the craziest stuff out there, but you trusted that whatever was going to come out of my mouth, you were confident in handling it, and I appreciate that. That was bold.
I was going to say the same thing. Running for a federal office like that, you can be as political as you want to be. So I definitely appreciate getting to. I mean, I know I'm off camera, but spend a little bit of time with you, get to know you. We could have thrown a couple curveballs at you. You had no idea. So we appreciate it for sure.
Doesn't matter. I'm game for when you get into this race, any of this kind of thing, you basically you sign up for whatever comes your way. And you know what? The bottom line is people are great. We share a lot of the same things. We have families, we've paid mortgages, we do these things, and that's why I have I think a certain empathy with my breadth and depth of experience to really serve the people of this district well.
Well, hey, I really appreciate it, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Good luck, and hopefully we'll talk to you again.
Before you go, Robert, what was the last book you read?
Last book I listened to, full book, The New Rules of War.
Okay.
New Rules of War. I highly recommend that to you, especially going into looking at the DoD budget. New Rules of War. I'm trying to think of I'm drawing a blank on that author. I'm the worst at that. Hold on, I'm going to look it up real quick. Because if you're listening to this and you haven't heard of this one, Sean McFate. Victory in an Age of Durable Disorder. He talks about our, the American failures on the military side of things over and over again, and he proposes a new strategy moving forward, which I don't think he's too far off. But yeah, New Rules of War. It's a good book. Highly recommend it.
Great.
What was the last book you read? Now you got to give me yours.
I just reread The Law by Bastiat. Great book on basic Econ 101 stuff. Between him and Hayek, those are kind of my guys on the economy.
You got to get freshened up on that. That's good.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah.
Okay, Bruce, have a good one. We'll talk to you again.